Hello, SHRM family. Welcome to another edition of the WorkplaceTech Spotlight. My name is Guillermo Corea, Managing Director of SHRMLabs, SHRM's Workplace Innovation Lab. I'm your host for this series where we shine a spotlight on some of the most interesting future of work topics, innovators, and disruptive technologies. Before we get going on today's topic, just a couple of quick announcements. For SHRM members who are not aware of the workplace tech community, you are missing out. This is the TripAdvisor for HR tech, and it's available now. So please visit workplacetechcommunity.shrm.org. For those of you watching on LinkedIn or other social media platforms, please share this live stream and tag SHRM. You can also use the hashtags SHRMLabs as well as WorkplaceTech. So interviewing has remained mostly unchanged since the 1920s. A hiring manager will sit with a prospective candidate and evaluate their competencies and skills using a variety of behavioral and job-related questions. However, the past 5 years have introduced a number of new technologies to make some parts of the interview process more efficient, but many traditional recruiting and sourcing processes are still in place. Now, keep in mind that if a wrong hire is made, 26% of a manager's time is going to be spent coaching a wrong hire. According to data that we have at SHRM, the average cost per hire is about $4,700, but many employers estimate the total cost to hire a new employee can be 3 to 4 times the position's salary. Because of this, we need to ensure our recruiting and interviewing processes are bringing the right candidates in the door. But in each step of the recruiting and hiring process, there can also be conscious and unconscious bias. As humans, unconscious bias will play a role in any interview, especially if it's not standardized. And as people managers, do we know each interview is fair and that we aren't turning away great talent? Unconscious bias exists in recruiting, and it is the responsibility of employers to both name it and address it in order to create diverse and successful organizations. So removing biases in the interview process is something that recruiters as well as hiring managers need to be aware of. But how do you go about doing it, right? That's the big question. So joining us to talk about this topic today is Vikrant Mahajan, CEO and founder of JobTwine. Vikrant, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the stage. Before we begin, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself and JobTwine.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks a lot for inviting. I'm the founder CEO of JobTwine. In total, I have around 19 years of experience in the technology world. Worked in India for 10 years in various technology leadership roles, and then moved to the US in 2014. Worked for 2 health tech startups in leadership roles in technology. They both got acquired by Optum. Joined Optum for almost 10, 11 months. Worked in a leadership role, and then took a plunge to build JobTwine to help solve the challenge of unconscious bias and eliminating bias in hiring. The basic crux and the basic theme there is a lot of time and a lot of tools and a lot of technology has been there around sourcing the candidates, the right candidates, or improving the top of the funnel if you think about it. But the last mile, where actual decisions are made on whether you're going to hire or not hire the right candidate or hire the candidate, has been left to the interviewers within the organizations, which are very human dependent. And organizations have actually there's a reliance on those humans, which is rightly so, because those are the employees. However, we all know that it's a process which is not very data oriented, and therefore it's important to know that whether what kind of a standardization is there. Are you really removing the unconscious bias that can creep in depending on who's taking the interview, not taking the interview, the multiple panelists on the team, and all. So our focus is how do we make sure that using technology, how do we enable the organizations to make sure that there is a data-oriented process around it, there is standardization around it, and it doesn't then matter whether person A or person B is taking an interview, the candidate is getting the right experience, and the focus is more on the skills than anything else for the candidate to help him hire, to help get the right candidate in the door for the skill, for the right job. So those are the areas, and that is where that is the thing that we've been focusing on as a part of this.
So let's get right to it, because we have a short amount of time here, right? So
Sure.
what would you say is the true cost of a bad hire, right? You just heard me say that according to some of the data that we've that SHRM has put together, it's about $4,700, but employers think it's a multiple of 3x, 4x the salary of a person. What do you think about that?
No, actually, it's a function of the job role, So the SHRM data that says is an amalgamation of every kind of a role from the bottom of the pyramid to top of the pyramid. But if you look at, depending on the kind of hire that you're making, the kind of salary that you do, there are so many studies that are done by Harvard and Gallup and all that tells you that the cost of a wrong hire can be an exorbitant cost from ranging from $50,000 to up to $240,000. And that cost of wrong hire is not just about the time that you have taken to take the interviews or bring the person in the door, the time that the person spends within the organization in unproductive time, the kind of challenges that come within the organization, the training time, the onboarding time, and then rehiring somebody else in place is a huge cost to the organizations. So if you really look at it, it's an intangible cost. It doesn't show on the balance sheet of the organization, and organizations have gotten used to saying, okay, we are going to replace 5% of workforce or 6% of workforce or 10% of workforce for not being able to perform. But sometimes we don't realize it could be a misfit. And the reason there's 69% of the organizations that were surveyed actually identified broken interviewing process as one of the key reasons for not being able to hire the right talent in the door. Not just that, as per a Gallup study, the world loses $7.8 trillion in productivity loss because of disengaged employees. And one of the key reasons for disengaged employees is the fact that you have hired a misfit, not necessarily somebody who doesn't have the right skill, but doesn't have the right skill for the job that you were looking for the role you were looking for. And primarily that is because at the time of vetting the candidate, the organization did not really know, the data points were not captured properly, and the hiring managers made a decision based upon certain things or certain data points from various interviewers, but not having the right set of visibility into what was asked, what was not asked, was it relevant or not relevant. So I think those are the key things that are important.
Yeah. So I think it's safe to say that based on what you were just saying a second ago, I mean, those are some of the common mistakes that companies make when hiring. Is that correct? Or
you are right. I mean, if you just think about it, let's try to understand what is a structured interviewing ecosystem. What does that even mean? And this is not something which is a new concept. It's something which has been there since ages in the government sector. If you look at it, if you look at a lot of defense roles that the government hire for, a lot of other critical roles within the organizations, within the government agencies, they have a very well defined process to understand who's going to be hired, why is it going to be hired. And there's a very beautiful diversity as well. The governments take care of the fact that they want to hire diverse people as well. One analogy that I give, Guillermo, which is interesting, is if you look at America, as a country, we are very diverse, and we have embraced diversity for hundreds of years now. Similarly, I come from India. India is a huge diverse country. As a country, as a fabric of the country, we are diverse, and pluralism is a key factor. But if you look at corporates, within corporates, that is something that should also, because we are like a small part of the overall ecosystem of the country. And what has happened, well, corporates have realized in India, and the executives are trying to do it, but the right sets of ecosystem is not there within the organizations to ensure that there is an enabler that comes in to do all of this. Our focus is
so going back to talking about the biases in the interview process, right? Maybe can you tell us highlight some of the issues there that you've seen around the biases in the interview process?
Yeah, what happens is it's a human nature. We tend to find a replica of ourselves without focusing on what is the right set of skill that the person is required to be performing in the job role. So when we define the job description, that is the first problem, where the job description sometimes is not very clear. And as an interviewer, if you're not being coached and trained properly on what is if you're taking 4 rounds of interview, for example, to bring somebody into the door, every single round of interview should be an incremental on what skill has to be assessed to let the candidate become a hire or not a hire. If you're not defining those skills appropriately, not coaching and training your panelists properly, not defining the right set of questions to say that, okay, these are the set of questions that should be asked to help us assess whether the person is the right fit or not, and then capturing the data and synthesizing that data in a manner which tells you that, okay, this is it matches X percentage or 80 or 90% of your requirement. If you are not doing those things, or if you're doing those things in a half-baked manner, you will not be able to get to the right state. And that is where the unconscious bias creeps in, because you suddenly start looking at the candidate from your own lens as an individual lens that, okay, the person is coming from ABC background, so he may not, by default, the person will not have that skill. And, not to say anything, but like Indians in the US, for example, are very, stereotyped into being just technology guys, who can just be good engineers. But if you look at, a lot of product roles, a lot of other roles, I'm just telling you the reality here, and similarly, there are a lot of other things. So it's very important to standardize these things within the organization and not in a silo, because if you just let 2 or 3 people build that process for you, they will be coming with their own biases. So that market intelligence is very important to know, that for the cohort of organizations who are hiring for similar roles, what are the set of things that are working? What are the kind of candidates that are coming in the door across the board, not just within your own little world? And that's where, a platform is important, which can give you that insight and intelligence.
Yeah. And I do have a question around structured interviewings in a second, but first I wanted to mention, talking about conscious and unconscious biases again, right? So our CEO, actually, Johnny C. Taylor Jr., gave a great example of one that he personally dealt with, and this was during the SHRM annual conference, which just ended 2 weeks ago. So for those of you who weren't at the annual conference, you missed out on a great keynote from Johnny. But one of the things that he brought, and this was an example of an unconscious bias or bias that he had in a hiring process, right? So he was the first CHRO at IAC. IAC is a huge Fortune 500 company that has Ticketmaster, Match.com under them, right? And so he was charged with searching for a new CEO for the home shopping network, right?
Okay.
And he came up with a list of 10 candidates, and the top person that came out of that list of the top 10 candidates didn't have a college degree at the time, right?
Wow.
And essentially the CEO basically overruled and said, this is the person that I want to see. I want to see her, right? That person ended up being Mindy Grossman, who turned out to be the CEO that led the turnaround for the home shopping network, right? So there are biases that happen, all
Absolutely.
over. I thought that was a great example of one where, education is a bias, right? I mean, you come in and you think that, this person needs a college degree and they need to have an MBA from, XYZ company or whatever. You may be missing out on a great number of candidates that could potentially work out well, right?
You nailed it on the head, Guillermo. That is where, if you look at where the world is going in the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to be very skill focused. Do you have the right skill or not necessary to be required for that job? It's not about which organization, which degree do you come from, which organization do you come from. There are biases that creep in. If you are coming from one of the big tech and giving an interview, there is again a bias that comes in the mind of the interviewer. Oh, you know what? This person would already know by default these 2-3 things. So let me not even ask that. Let me go to something else. But if there is a candidate coming from not from such a renowned big tech, you would want to go from step 1. But in the other case, you would miss out on step 1, step 2. You generally jump to step 3. These are realities that I'm telling you on the ground, having led teams, 100+ engineering and product teams. And you are so right in saying that. I think where AI is coming into it and helping the humans, what is going to happen is humans are going to be the eventual judge of whether you are the right candidate or not. But they need to be enabled using the right technologies to tell them the kind of interviews that have happened, the kind of answers that have been given are relevant in this space or not, based upon what the skill is that you're looking for. And it's going to be very skill based. So my theme is, it's going to turn into skill-based thing, as opposed to whether which education background you come from or you don't come from doesn't really matter. It's not going to matter at all in the next few years.
So very quickly, because we have a short amount of time left here, how does structured interviewing eliminate bias, and how can HR professionals begin to implement this in their organizations?
Great question. I think it's very important, first of all, to make sure that you define the right competencies within the organization that you want to hire for. Now, defining the right competencies cannot be a one-person job. It has to be a collective job. And it also needs to have, you need to have the right market intelligence to say, if I'm hiring a product manager in my team, or if I'm hiring a customer success manager, what does it take to have a right customer success manager? What are the basic skills that are required, and what are the skills that are going to be important for my organization? So defining the right competencies, defining the right playbooks for those competencies, how many rounds are necessary, what are the right set of questions to ask, and then how do you coach and train your panelists on that, and then have an ecosystem of taking an interview where whatever interview is being conducted, the data is captured. What was asked, what was not asked, using transcription technologies, so that there is a level of you can go back and tell whether whether what it was good or not. So having that workflow done, we are defining the competencies to the capturing, synthesizing the feedback to make the hiring and no hiring decision is a key element which every organization, recruitment managers and hiring managers should go through. And they still go through partly, but it's important to have the right tools and technologies in place and use AI as an enabler for conducting these interviews.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Vikrant. I hope everyone out there enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like more information about JobTwine, please visit them at jobtwine.com. Thank you all for tuning into the SHRMLabs Workplace Tech Spotlight. If you enjoyed this live stream, please share it using the hashtags SHRMLabs, WorkplaceTech, and SHRM, and visit us at SHRMLabs.com to stay up to date. We'll see you next